Hola, buona tarda. Good afternoon here in Europe. And as we have some people from New York, also good morning for those over there. And thank you for following online and also for all of you who are here today to have a conversation on this project that we started earlier this year and which has received the name of Nenúfars blancs, which means white water lilies in Catalan, and which started as a kind of a story that comes from some old time ago when there had been these voices saying that there had been some water plants in the water area over here, but that in the reconstruction they had not been kind of planted, or there were no water plants. And although we had done some tests many years ago trying to put pots with water with no chlorine in them and putting the water lilies inside, then as it was not very nice when the plants started growing and the leaves started kind of touching the water with chlorine, that was kind of removed. So that's why it was really fantastic when, was it maybe a couple of years ago, that we met with the team of CENTRALA, who is Małgorzata Kusiewicz and also Simone De Jacobis, but also curator Ola Alexandra Caciores, who is online today. And they were doing research on the use of water plants in urban planning with their studies first in Warsaw, so they are from Poland, and they had been researching on amazing landscape projects in the city, post-war war, but also previously to that moment. And they had also been researching on modern movement architecture and how water and plants in it had a very kind of strong presence, but then suddenly they disappeared, like what happened over here. So they kind of proposed an intervention that was somehow a bit more than an intervention, because it is something that has been here in the pavilion during all these months, and that our idea is to continue having the water lilies and some other plants and some other elements that have helped in the naturalization of the water pond, the big pond on the other side of the pavilion. And this research had also started kind of being thought about and discussed with an intervention which took place in 2012 by Andrés Jaque, which was called Phantom Mies as Rendered Society. And Andrés Jaque, we have online, was also thinking about the ecosystems of the Barcelona pavilion. And later on, also with Spiros, who was researching on issues also connected to that. There was a text that was written and published in a publication that we did here at the Barcelona pavilion in the Mies van der Rohe Foundation. And well, these were some first steps finally to really start pushing towards the moment in which we got rid of chlorine and all these chemical products, and would be able to start kind of thinking how these plants and all this life could come back to the pavilion, with some challenges, and we'll see that. It's not been easy because of different situations. The first one was that in the reconstruction, the pond was much more shallow. It was shallower than the original one, but we'll see that. And they kind of, CENTRALA, together with Alexandra, with Ola, started kind of thinking and researching on the best way to bring back this part of the life of the Barcelona pavilion. And that was not done alone, but they came, and we had certain research moments and walking around the city, seeing how water plants were also present in other parts of the city, here in Montjuïc, for example, but not only. And then we discovered that there was this nursery called Tres Turons, where they had been researching on autochthonous water plants, and we started getting in contact with Carles Palau, who's also here today, and we'll listen to his part of the story as well. And the conversation continued also between the Polish team here in Barcelona and Carles Palau. And we also wanted to feel kind of to involve also other people. For example, Parks and Gardens, Parcs i Jardins, which is the institution, the part of the City Hall of Barcelona in charge of the Parks and Gardens of the City of Barcelona, which also have another nursery which is called Tres Pins here in Montjuïc, and we're neighbors. We have collaborated previously, but we also wanted them to be involved. We also visited, for example, the Botanical Garden, and wanted to know also their point of view, their opinions, if this was going to be possible, the difficulties. Then also El Cicle de l'Aigua, the cycle of water, which is another part of another institution which was important to also discuss on the quality of the water that we have over here and the relationship with the water lilies. And so they continued, this plan. We've had some very, very good connections and relationship with Poland over the years as the Mies van der Rohe Foundation, working with artists, working with institutions over there. And so we were kind of happy to participate or collaborate another time or again with a Polish team. And actually, in this case, we also asked the Instituto Polaco de Cultura, the Polish Institute of Culture in Madrid, to also support the project, as it has been an important, basic, essential collaboration between the Polish team of Centrala together with Alexandra, and such an important building as the Barcelona Pavilion. So we also thought that we have been collaborating with the Landscape Biennial, which is organized from Barcelona. So we also have Marina Cervera, and so we also have representing the city district, Cristina. So thank you all very much for being here today with us, and also to share all your different experiences in this process. This is a part of the process that we were experimenting. There were many challenges, and I'm sure that you will kind of explain a little bit which ones we had and how we are kind of developing on this. And basically, that's the introduction that I wanted to have. We will count now with the team by Centrala, who will make a first presentation. Then I will ask Andrés Jaque to share his experiences also with these ecosystems over here in the pavilion. Then we will also ask Carles Palau to speak about his experience. We will see a short film that we have produced, 4 minutes, explaining how the plants have evolved during these months over here. And then I will ask also Marina to come to the stage to share with us, and together with the rest of you, on a conversation on the different topics that have been tackled in this experience. So thank you all for being here, and now I would like to ask both Gosia and Simone to share your experiences here. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, I am Simona.
I'm Gosia.
We are Centrala architects, and first and foremost we'd like to thank you so much, the Mies van der Rohe Foundation, for hosting us here, and the Polish Institute of Culture, and from the foundation especially, of course, Ivan, Adriana, but also Carles. Your input and your expertise has been fundamental for making this project happening. And now we'll start a little bit with the sort of like an introduction explaining how we got to this project with our practice.
By shaping architecture, we can amplify nature. And for us, every urban body of water, such as this pond, especially if this is a natural pond with water plants, is part of what we like to call a waterscape, so water system in every scale. And can we see the presentation?
Because I don't know if the public sees Alexandra or the presentation. Yeah, okay, now. Great.
Water circulation phenomena such like evaporation, transpirations from the plants, rain, Those are microclimates shaping events. And the beauty of them is that they are not artificial energy dependent. And what we have learned from water and what we have learned from water plants is that for us, the main task for the future as architects will be to design artisanal microclimates.
So, I mean, we started like collaborating with water by designing with atmospheric phenomena such as rain. We proposed the rain pavilion in 2018 as a sort of like monument to the weather for the kind of climate change, the disappearing rain that we had in Poland, the drought. So somehow the rain pavilion was supposed to be a device, a sort of a mediator, a resonator to which foster a sort of sensorial appreciation of rain. But not only rain, just a single rain, but actually a history of all Polish rains that disappeared, like such as Szewka, Siekawica, Kapanina, Kłapanina, Dża, Trzaskawica, Ulewa. Rain has different forms, raindrops broke, and this pavilion, the shape of this pavilion was informed by this such a rich array of rains. And after that, we produced also sort of like a climatic fictional project for Warsaw by proposing like wetlands for Warsaw, like if we had to reopen clogged former river courses. We made visualization of that in different seasons, in different times of the day, with different kind of weather. We proposed like ponds on top of like block of flats. We proposed like villas surrounded by ponds. All the time including historical references and plants, as you can see. We proposed like that maybe everybody could have like a pond on their balcony, creating like a sort of like prefab that we can attach to elevations.
And then we understood that we know nothing as architects about the water plants and how to create natural ponds. And that picture was very important inspiration. This is a picture from 80s. It's showing one of the modernistic prefab, concrete prefab that we know by hearts from our streets. But on that picture, it was full of water lilies. And we understood that we had water lilies in our city before, and something happened that now we have only sterile and septic dead pools. This shift happened in 80s, in 90s. So we decided to recreate that pond to become like a water gardeners. And we learned a lot. We read what we could about the aquatic knowledge. And we understood that this knowledge somehow disappeared from architectural imaginary. With that pond, we could show to that people that it doesn't smell, it's not like creating clouds of mosquitoes, that the plants really cleaning the water without chemistry, that the water is clean, that bees are in love with this kind of ponds. So they started to follow, and now we have few of them in different Polish cities. And we always using the prefabs, modernistic prefabs from 60s.
Maybe I can just add that in creating these several tiny water pots in different Polish cities, we always collaborated with local botanical gardens, and plants are being donated and some purchased, but mostly endangered species. So it's somehow like this not only creates this tiny local microclimates, but also brings back some species which are in the brink of extinction.
But those spots happened that summer as a parallel process to the intervention here. So we understand that collectively we need to recover this partnership with the water plants. And what was surprising for us that the water plants they are not always beautiful, they are not always perfect, they are not always in bloom. Sometimes they becoming brownish like trees, and sometimes they need to be dormant. So in Poland, for example, they need to have a period without the water, and they have to rot. They have to be smelly, they have to be ugly. So those perfect pictures from the past was not like illustrating the full knowledge that we wanted to bring back. And so we understood that we need to partnership with the real specialists, with the botanists and people who know how to recreate these small domestic pond into such a scale like Mies van der Rohe pavilion.
Now we'll leave to Ola the continuation of the presentation in the process that led to the intervention here.
Oh, thank you very much. So I will tell you a little bit what we did with this hands-on experience. Later on we got a research grant from iPortunus that helped us to develop a bigger project in what one can call experimental preservation. So we were very interested in historical relationship between aquatic botany and modernist architecture, and especially in how aquatic plants have been part of architectural imaginary, as Gosia already said, and how and why they disappeared from most of their locations. And we took Mies van der Rohe and the Rijs projects as our case studies because in their designs from 1930s, many of their designs included water plants, with the most known winter garden from Villa Tugendhat. But we also collected some practical knowledge within this research process. As Ivan already mentioned, we visited botanical gardens. So this is the oldest botanical garden in Europe, in Padova, that helped us to also collect some knowledge on water gardening, and local specialists whom you will meet today from around Barcelona, that we are very grateful for their help. So building upon this historical and botanical research, we conducted an experiment of bringing water lilies back to the bigger pool of the Barcelona pavilion. Here you see the historical image, how it looked. But as Ivan already mentioned, it wasn't an easy task for many reasons. And one of them was that during the 1980s reconstruction, the pool became much more shallow. And here you can see the difference, yes, between the historical image and the image that we've done during our research. But we consulted our idea with Fernando Ramos, one of the architects involved in the reconstruction. And after this consultation, we decided to take up this challenge. And first we planted the water lilies on a grid, following somehow the architecture of the pavilion. But then we decided to give up control. So the idea was that we will start with this more systematic planting and then see how the lilies will break this grid, following their own preferences, the spots of sun, shadow, etc. And we invited to the pavilion a big range of white water lilies. You can maybe move the image to the next one. You can see here how rich the world of even white water lilies is. And we decided to make a kind of exhibition of their own, like from the plants themselves. So we selected species in that way that they can narrate. Each species can narrate a different story. We explained that in detail in the text accompanying the project, but just to give you an example, we planted an endemic Catalonian white water lily, so Nymphaea alba, and around her a group of night blooming flowers, a kind of night watch around the queen, as we joked. And the fact that they were opening at night was meant to correspond with Kolbe's sculpture, the dawn at the axis of the pavilion. We also had some hybrid species, as well as other plants, insects, and microorganisms. They helped keep the water clean, but they also helped with another important task, so turning the pool into an ecosystem. And this very fact was meant to break the usual reading of the pool as just another surface of the pavilion. And why we decided to do that in the pavilion, it was that it was a great place also to show that it's a part of a bigger story of connections between aquatic botany and architecture of exhibitions. So this connection started, of course, with the Crystal Palace by Joseph Paxton, the building that was not only inspired by water lily in its structure, but also housed water lilies inside, as you can see on the first image. But also this story included 1889 Paris World's Fair, where Claude Monet met Joseph Bory Latour-Marliac, the first plantator of hybrid water lilies, and this was the very reason those famous water lilies paintings were possible. But also many world fairs, as shown here in 1937 and 1939, for instance, where water lilies accompanied national exhibitions. And for us, is a beginning, like planting water lilies in Barcelona pavilion is a beginning of a bigger process. So as Ivan already mentioned, is a process of making water lilies feel comfortable in this too shallow pool of the Barcelona pavilion, which will be the challenge that will continue throughout next year. But for us, it's also a more general process of bringing water plants back to their original locations as they disappeared for many of them. So I will give you just few examples. The first two are from Warsaw. So here you can see examples of Warsaw housing estates from socialist times that had ponds filled with water plants that helped to shape microclimate of public spaces. But also one of our favorite examples is from the courtyard of the Warsaw Faculty of Architecture. What you can see here is a special teaching apparatus for teaching aquatic botany to students of architecture. It was used by the Faculty of Architecture, but is now completely abandoned. But we also made a quite extensive list of many, sometimes very renowned projects, as here you can see UNESCO headquarters by Isamu Noguchi, where water lilies were and are missing. The list includes also such names as Carlos Scarpa, Piero Porcinari, Roberto Burle Marx, Richard Neutra. Here you can see Arne Jacobsen from Oxford, and those lilies we hope are still there. Our biggest dream, which is the last slide, which is the Giardini of Venice Biennale, where in few locations, some of them designed by Carlos Scarpa, they are now empty ponds that were once filled with water lilies. And this is our big dream, to bring those water lilies back to the very place where the architectural imagination is shaped, let's say, every 2 years. But this whole project has the aim to, as Ivan said at the beginning, and Gosia and Simone mentioned, to bring water plants back to the imaginary of architects, just to recall them as possible, to design microclimates and work with plants without the use of chemicals and electricity. And this Barcelona project is the first step to show that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you, Ola, Gosia, and Simone. And it was really nice now remembering some moments, in which I was also able to go to Warsaw and visit some of these places with you and some of your experiments. And I think we have Andres Jaque also now on the screen with us from New York. Andres, hello, Andres. He is the dean now at Columbia University. And with Andres, we collaborated, as I said, in this project called Phantom, Mies Rendered Society. And I'm not sure if people are very aware that now at the Art Institute of Chicago, there's a part of the Barcelona pavilion over there from that project. And actually, there are these pots, glass pots for the water lilies, the first ones that we used, and some of them went to Chicago. So Andres, we wanted to, thank you obviously for being with us. We know you have a tight schedule, but also so we could hear your experience with this story of the pavilion, which goes further also from the water lilies, and goes towards the garden, to go towards Niebla the cat. So welcome, and I give you the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here and follow the presentations of Gosia and Simone and also of Alessandra that I very much enjoyed. And I'm very happy to be part of this conversation. And thank you, Van, for curating all these reflections that prove how the Barcelona Pavilion is a living entity beyond the life of cells and flows, but also living as a cultural device that shake cultures and ideas. And I think that's incredibly important. It's not a monument of the past, but a living entity in the way that it questions the making of reality now. And I want to, oh, I need permission to share my screen, right? Maybe you can give it?
Permission right away.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be disabled.
Now you should be able to.
Okay. I know it's still host disabled participant screen sharing.
In the meantime, for those of you that are here, I'm not sure if you have seen a difference, a change that just happened this week in the pavilion, and which has also something to do with this moment in which we are naturalizing the water area. But the carpet on the floor, the black carpet, is totally new. And it has been a project that has been taking place in the last months together with Nani Marquina, and it's a new natural wool carpet. So getting rid of the kind of acrylic or kind of non-natural carpets, so that we slowly also understand that this is how it was produced in 1929. But in the meantime, we also have Andres. Back to you.
Yeah, the question of architectural ecological dimension, it's not an option. Architecture is ecological. There's no way around that. What it's the question, it's in what way the ecology of or the ecological dimension of architecture is constructed politically. For me, that's the main question, and the way that I think of the possibility of addressing these questions or these projects that Gosa and Simone and Alessandra are also part of. And this is a further discussion about what is the way architecture operates. A big part of what modern architecture was require its way of working to become invisible, non-perceptible. So modernity is a form, a cultural paradigm that depends very much on invisibilizing a big part of their societal and ecological dimension. That is something that is being explored through different fields in political ecology, in the realm of STS, in post-colonial studies, in queer studies, and all those, and in feminist studies. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that there's so much to learn from this, from the way architecture is being discussed in these fields of inquiry, to understand what is the way that we relate to architecture now. This is, of course, something that we've been doing in the last years, both as an academic and a scholarly project through research and books, but also through specific constructions in which we prototype alternative ways to construct the ecological engagement or dimension of architecture. This is, for instance, the Cosmo project in MoMA PS1 that incorporated the notion of composition to architecture, the composition of many different actors, some of them human, some of them more than human, actually humans expanding into more than human forms of life, but also projects that we've been and that we're developing, like the ocean space in Venice, or the Thyssen-Bornemisza collection, or the Rambla Climate House that participates of this idea of the possibility for architecture to operate as climate that Gosa and Simone were referring to. But I'd like to focus very rapidly to the basement of the Barcelona Pavilion, because when we go to the basement of the Barcelona Pavilion, and I hope those that are there can actually visit it, though it's probably not legal to do that now. But but because it was intended not to be making it possible for visitors to be authorized to go there. But we see that there's a big part of the history and the stories of the pavilion. And when we see this glass, we're talking of ecology. When we see this construction, we are seeing the end of a way to understand ecology as a process of refinement and exploitation, a notion of extraction that is very much looking like this. So when we look, for instance, at this glass, there's something about the need to make invisible its societal and ecosystemic dimension that actually it's hiding a very big truth that this architecture is ecology. This is the place where the silica, this is one of the sites where silica can be found in nature. This is Star Rocks in Illinois, one of the first places where silica was mass extracted. This is what it looks, this landscape, after becoming a site for extraction. And that's the silica that, reduced to this, is used to produce glass like the one that we see here. So there's a huge difference between this image and this. And this transition is very much what modernity engaged in doing. And I think that it's important to understand that what we see here is ecology, but ecology shaped in a very particular way through extraction. What is important is that that process needs to be perceived as naturalized. It needs to be perceived as non-constructed, as a given. Glass exists, we can buy it. Stone can be provided, cut and polished. Whereas, of course, there's a big effort in producing this particular, rendering nature as products, rendering ecosystems into resources. And that part here is very much materialized in the way that the pavilion operates as a two-story floor. A two-story floor where the upper part is perceived as naturalized, as something that is a given, as non-constructed, versus the whole process of making the pavilion as hidden, as an invisible part that needs to be hidden so that the narrative of modernity being automatically produced be plausible. But when we look at the basement of the pavilion in itself, is full of interesting things. This is where Ruth used to live. I don't know if that exists anymore, because this is a photograph from maybe more than 10 years ago now, when we started to work on this. And we see here where the pesticides that were used at that point, and that I guess are used now, to reduce the presence of insects in the pavilion, were kept. Of course, they had to be kept invisible in the basement, because otherwise the nature that is there, the plants that are there, would perceive as constructed, not as a given. For instance, this is the vacuum cleaner and the catcher that are used, I guess, still now, to remove the mud and the water from the holes in the travertine marble, because those are the places where moss would grow. So Lily Rohe and Mies van der Rohe wanted them to be open, but of course that would mean that the water and the mud would get there, and with the time, moss would grow there, and that will basically make the slabs of the travertine break. So when we see here again, it's a ecological reduction device that it's also connected to what we see here in another part of the basement, this bomb, this pump that is with the chlorine. It's basically ensuring, or is designed to ensure, that there's no algae that would grow in the ponds, and they would remain clear. But of course, that's, again, if we read it through ecological perspectives, that means that there's a big reduction of the spectrum of the forms of life that can be found in the pavilion. As Alessandra explained, the history of modernity, it's much more complex. But the ecological dimension of modernity was incredibly loaded with ideology. Water lilies were not just a naive thing to have. It was a game of power. In the Barcelona pavilion, we have to remember that was a construction that was responding to the fact that Germany, after the Versailles treaties, were not able to expand internationally, commercially. They had very limited capacity to do that. Water lilies were actually a colonial dream, were basically a game of power. The UK, France, Italy, they have been growing water lilies because they have the capacity to expand colonially. Actually, when we see the tradition of water lilies, we see that those were colonial powers to bring water lilies and to allow water lilies to blossom in places like the UK was actually a part of the expansion of the UK as a colonial power. These water lilies that were brought from Bolivia were a way to extract biological capital from distant and remote locations and channel it to the center of the empires. And what was what became crucial is to understand that water lilies were fertility devices, reproduction devices, and the project of actually making lilies blossom, being able to control the reproduction of many forms of life, from flowers to humans, was actually part of the colonial power. So we could go on forever. Controlling reproduction, it's a part of coloniality. And it still is, as we see in the front page of the newspapers. We could go on forever here. This is the work that we did, bonified homes in Kew Gardens and
November 1849.
but it's
The
important
first
to
time
see that
Victoria Amazonica.
the possibility to colonize Bolivia and to make the UK a place that could control the blossoming of the lilies was required an architectural invention. This is Capability Brown Lilies Pavilion that we could say it's one of the first precedents of Mies architecture. The glass architecture of the pavilion was very much intended to provide the possibility to control the conditions in which these plants would be living, so that Capability Brown and the people he was working for could win the competition that Queen Victoria had launched to support the efforts of colonizing the blossoming and controlling as a colonial project, the blossoming of the Victoria Amazonica. Actually, it's called Victoria Amazonica because it's after the name of the queen, of course. And this was a project that was broadcasted in the media. What we see in the last image is the daughter of Capability Brown standing on one of these leaves, gigantic leaves, and that was published in the London Illustrated, that was multiplying by 20 its reach with this image. So this is actually where the origin of the tradition of modernity on controlling ecosystem comes from. And it's another way of speaking of this extraction model from a colonial perspective. What is interesting is that also ecology through modernity, it's been a place for dissidents that are also, that take many different forms. This is the most dear place of the basement for me. Very sad that I guess no longer exists. This is the place where Kat Niebla lived. Kat Niebla, I met her through Victor, actually, that I think is there, sitting there. This is a photograph that I took, or Victor and I took together of Kat Niebla. I was so surprised or kind of attracted by her eyes, but her eyes were reflecting that she had macular atrophia. By living in the basement, in the darkness of the basement, a big part of her life, she developed this photophobia that ended up making her Mies blind. Whereas Mies lovers never see the basement, Kat Niebla never sees or would never see the upper part of the pavilion in a kind of paradoxic way. But it's interesting to see why Kat Niebla was took there. She was took there because She was taken there because basically there was a need to control the presence of rodents in the basement and in the pavilion at large. And that is where she was called in. So she was an ecological actor, an actor of ecological reductions herself, as the pesticides that Ruth used to reduce the presence of insects in the pavilion, as the pump that is helping the water circulate with chlorine, as the chlorine. But at the same time, she was shaped by the pavilion. The ecology of the pavilion was shaping her body physically, her biology, her own ecosystem. And this is what, for me, it's interesting, that architecture always operates as a reflective device, a device that both is shaping and is shaped, and that architecture and the ecological dimension of architecture is bodied by many different forms of life. When we go to this, it's actually important to see that we're in a moment where the notions of ecology have changed. It's no longer possible, no desirable, to prolong the extractive model of modernity. We don't want to render ecology a resource. We don't want to extract materials and segregate them and alienate them from their relational capital. We don't want to support, probably, or at least not me, definitely, colonial projects of channeling capital to one point and producing inequality and alienation. So the project, the ecological project of modernity at large, is something that needs to be rethought. It's something that is being challenged, it's something that is being decolonized, it's something that is being queered. And I think that it's important to understand that everything is ecological, but not everything is ecological in the same way. And what we're probably looking at, it's the possibility of empower those parts of the modern legacy, those dissident moments in it, where there was the possibility of non-segregational ecology, an ecology that is not based on colonialism, is not based on extraction, but is based on the intense relationability of different forms of life and entities. And that is what, as a very kind of primary attempt, we did at the Barcelona Pavilion. We were thinking of the ecologies of the pavilion as something that should not be based on this divide between the upper floor, super visible, and telling the story of a naturalized or kind of the inevitability of a political system, to something that could be seen as a messiness of ecological diversity. And that's what we did by bringing many of the fragments that could be found in the basement to the upper floor, and to really problematize, and by problematize I mean denaturalize, making it visible how the pavilion was constructed out of societal and ecological associations, that it was the result of relationability, that it was actually shaped as a multiple pavilion with many different versions of it. And that is, for me, what somehow it's the challenge now in thinking the pavilion ecologically now, or thinking an ecological or an ecosystem Mies and Rohe that we could be happy about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andres. And Ola and Andres, we hope that you can stay with us a little bit longer, so afterwards we can have this conversation. But I think that before that, I would like to invite Carles Palau, who is a biologist, also who founded this nursery called Tres Turons, which is a nursery in which I think it's a reflection of what we have been doing to our environment, to nature in the last century, mostly in the 20th century. So it's a nursery in which they are recovering many of these plants that have kind of disappeared here in Catalonia mostly, and that they are not only trying to save but also to reintroduce, and therefore not only extracting as we've done, and Andres was saying, from nature, but at this time also kind of working with it. Because I'm sure there will be many things that will come up that you all start kind of having some questions to share. And also, Andres, there was this very interesting project that we have been working with and we continue working with, Elizaba and Stella Raola and Rohe Paez. Stella's here with us, and who are right now working with this evolution of the travertine stone panels and the different materials which get this life, and the greenery starts kind of growing in it, and how this is suddenly erased, but how it could also be part of the natural evolution of the pavilion without having to clean it. So, Carlos, thank you.
I have a list of some things that I will say. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in all these projects, and especially today. I'm really happy to be here with you. And I will not speak that much, but I just want to mention some ideas that maybe will be discussed later. One idea is that the water ecosystems is a matter of climate change problem. What we are doing here and many other places, recovering water ecosystems is a really important job, because wetlands and other water ecosystems are really disappearing, are the most threatened ones in the world. From the 70s to now, most of the water ecosystems, almost the half, well, in Europe, more than the half of the wetlands have disappeared in Europe. It means that many species are disappearing, or maybe some others not still have disappeared, but really threatened. This is a question I want to mention. Another point of view, different from what Andres told us about the kind of colonization point of view, when they try to plant water lilies and those Victoria Amazonias in those years. What we are doing now is we are trying to work with autochthonous species, many autochthonous species here and everywhere. This is a responsibility of every part of the world, each region of the world. We have the responsibility to conserve them. So this is kind of the moment, like Noah, en English, Noah Ark, Arca de Noé in English, or Noah Ark. And we have a kind of opportunity of doing these things here. So why is it very interesting to the attempt? It is being really difficult, but when we are trying to use white water lily here, we have a message because many people, even many botanists, they don't know that water lilies are autochthonous, are native from Europe. There are many species of water lilies around the world, but the white water lily, Nymphea alba, is a native European species, and many people think of water lilies only as exotic or ornamental, hybrid kind of plants. So when we use this plant here, we are telling people that water lilies was also a native plant from here, that it is disappearing all around Europe. And why is it so useful to work with these species? Because it can work as a flag species. This concept has been very used when working about animals. You have a famous animal that the people and the children and the TV and the politicians will focus on that animal, and when we protect that animal, we are protecting the whole ecosystem, the whole habitat, and we are protecting a lot of species. But when we talk about plants, not many plants has been used as flag species. And if we focus on conservation of native water plants, I think that white water lily can be a good flag species to conserve the whole ecosystem of those species. So that's why we also tried to use the white native water lily and other native water plants. It's being really difficult, but we will keep on trying and we will do it. Why is it being difficult? I will take another idea. I think that here in this country, culturally, we have a kind of phobia to water. We need to see all the time what's underwater, what's there. And in other countries, this is not like this. I don't know if everybody will agree, but what I have seen in other countries is that that's not that compulsory that you have to see what's under the water. But here in this country, it's, we have a clear phobia to algae, to have a dark something, you don't know what you are touching with your feet. And maybe this is because of the malaria past that we had here. In cold countries, there was no malaria, so they have not a political past of eliminating wetlands. We have had a policy of eliminating wetlands, and we associate wetlands with mosquitoes and all those problems. So for us in this country, this is a bigger challenge, because we have to rethink how do we relate with water. And my last point I want to mention is that I think that this phobia to water where you don't know what's under there, this is why in the reconstruction of the pavilion, they built such a shallow pavilion. I think she will agree from Parcs et Jardins. Most of the water masses in the cities, not only Barcelona, are very shallow. Easy to clean, easy to empty when you have any kind of problem, and so this is the challenge that we have here. Mies, why did he build a 80 centimeter depth pond? Because I guess he asked somebody which depth need water lilies, so they did like this. And when somebody reconstructed this here in the 80s, they just wanted the picture, but not the water lilies. This is another thing. So, do we want the nature adapt to our architecture, or do we want to adapt the architecture to those ecosystems? We are seeing every moment that we follow what's happening here, that when we have a good ecosystem, it works better. When the ecosystem is damaged with the chlorine, the plants also work worse. So that's all. Thank you very much. We continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And actually, this pavilion was built in 1929 for the international exhibition that took place in Barcelona, here in Montjuïc, which is full of gardens, parks, and so on, and together with all the other buildings that we're seeing from over here. But also at that time is when the nursery of Barcelona, the public nursery, the Tres Pins, was also created. So it was a moment in which there are some water sources, natural water sources here in the mountain. The city needed a lot of plants for all the parks and gardens that were being created, did in Montjuic and elsewhere in the other parks. And was not only about plants, because there was already an ecosystem, and there is an ecosystem in this part of the city and the city as a whole, in which there's all kinds of animals, insects, and so on that have also appeared over here. So we're focusing sometimes on the water lilies and the water plants, but that has allowed for frogs. We were sharing before some photographs of some endangered frogs from here that have come this summer to the pond. Also, bats have appeared. They were already there, but we have had many more. Dragonflies and all kinds of insects. Know that, Carlos, you were much more aware of which ones there were inside the water. And this is also what this short video that we have prepared together with Akkerblom shares. So let's enjoy this in-process video that we're working on. So I would now like to ask Simone, Gosha, Carlas, and Marina, and also Ola and Andres from home to come over here with me so that we can share a little bit of the conversation. Marina, because we haven't been able to ask you yet anything. But you're the director of the Biennial of Landscape, the Landscape Biennial that is organized from here, from Barcelona. And well, we have been sharing sometimes, some experiences between what you do and how we also develop some projects over here in the pavilion. And your experience through the prizes and the biennial and the discussions on this topic of plants and water in landscape projects.
So I was reflecting on this because we've been talking while this process was going on. And actually, there's two things that we have been working through the landscape office in the Architectural Association. One was a huge debate on the role of vegetation and gardens in modern architecture. So that was an online session that we coordinated together with the Docomomo, which is the Modern Movement Documentation Center, and an association of gardeners, Jardins y Jardiners, that it's a local entity here. And like one of the thoughts that we share is how we lost a little bit of the culture in gardening that was always present with modern architecture, like hand by hand. So that includes also this part of aquatic vegetation. And we wanted to vindicate, in a way, also the role of people like Rohe Tuturi. And I'm trying to sue a little bit the relation between different messages that I heard today. So on one hand, like the landing of this culture of the international exhibitions in Barcelona and how these have an impact on the gardening happens through the both exhibitions that we had here. So in 1888 in the Ciutadella, and then in 1929. And it's Rubio, who is somebody that is learning at the time from Forestier, who's a gardener in Paris, who will be the first, like the master chair of the gardens and parks in the city of Barcelona, who will be having on one hand the idea of having our own nurseries. So that's something that it's interesting to link the need of cultivating indigenous plants and try to invest with those nurseries to have like major control of the indigenous plants that you are using in the garden. So that's one of his contributions. And in terms of gardening and the introduction of aquatic vegetation, I think that he was one of the first ones to, also because Barcelona was like really impacted by the Japanese pavilion during those exhibitions. So everybody that was wealthy wanted to have something like Oriental. So we have, for instance, in our university, in the UPC, where the dean is held, it was the household of the Girona house, and they had like this Japanese garden, they had a lake, they had these water lilies. So he understands how that need of the private and the wealthy ones to have signs of culture through the water lilies can be also integrated into public space, first into palaces like the Jardín de Pedralbes, or the Palace of the King when he visited Barcelona, and then also in public parks like the one in Turo Park. So I think that we have like two contributions that for me in my head refer to Rubio, so nurseries and this idea of the water lilies inside public space of the city. And in terms of contemporary, also through the other thing that we developed through the landscape office in the architectural chamber, also in relation with UPC, which is the university, we have this international landscape biennial that it's held in Barcelona every 2 years. And that's been going on for 24 years. And before coming here, I was trying to see at which point we had projects that were dealing with aquatic vegetation, like the main one would be in like the winner of the third biennial, which is a botanical park in Bordeaux from Catherine Mosbach, which is a beautiful modern conceptualization of what a botanical park could be. And it has a part that it's devoted to aquatic plants, and it has different parts of the pond, especially referring on the relation between the aquatic plant and people. So she's approaching the plant not from an ecosystematical point of view, but more on which kind of service the plant is giving to the people. So if it's from a medicinal point of view, or it's a plant that it's giving nutrition, or it's a plant that it's giving remediation to the water. So she's organizing that, and I thought that that would be a very nice example, because basically the relation between landscape architecture with aquatical plants is not through, at least contemporary, does not go through the ornamental approach, but in a very, very much more indirect approach, that it's more about how you would use some half aquatical plants so that they can subsist with more or less water to remediate water. So it's basically held into water treatment systems. And that started, and then I started to go through all our database, which is a huge database of all the projects that we have had. And since 2006, there's an increase of projects that are using remediation. We had in the 2006 a winner, it was an EXCO, but one of the EXCO winners was a remediation water treatment plant. And the project did not have much design or shape, but it was basically like the machinery of how that could work in a big scale. And then little by little, I can see parts of water remediation in mostly all the projects that are finalists. So in the most recent times, we have lots of nature-based solutions, different projects that maybe there are salt marshes, sustainable urban drainage, but it's become a trend where the water plants are fundamental as long as they have a performative role, more than an ornamental one.
Great. I wanted to ask you if you have any questions for Ola and Andres, who are on the screens. No, don't worry, they're seeing you from in front. So, if you have any questions, because I think, Andres, you will have to leave in 10 minutes, if I'm not wrong. So maybe.
So let's give the voice to Ola.
Or Ola, exactly. Would you like to kind of make any comments on what has been said so far by all of you?
Yeah, so I can add about this performative role of water plants. This was for us also very interesting to discover, and what we wanted to, because we also observed this, projects focused on water, on aquatic vegetation are becoming more and more popular. We wanted to bring this history, so show that there is also a history to refer to and some references that we can dig out from the past. But that brings a very important challenge that I would like to underline, because it was going through all our presentations, and I think it's an important point to discuss. The question of the image. So what Carles pointed to at the very end, because this project was here in Barcelona Pavilion was challenging because we had to lose control, let's say, because and that was like this whole year since we planted the water lilies in April and waited for them to grow, was step by step getting like losing this control, or like allowing us to trust nature more than we did. Yes, and all this equipment that Andres showed in his presentation, we switched it off step by step. Yes, so it was important, and I think this is what those projects about water vegetation bring into the debate about landscape is that we have to adapt to different way of thinking about what is around us. Yes, that we want, as Carlos said, that we won't see exactly what is below. That some things will be coming, like will be happening without our control. That we have to get rid of this control at certain points, and that was quite of a journey this year, let's say. So as I think we are meeting like in this process, yes, and the project will continue next year. We will see how what we have learned and how this project will develop further when we know already how plants behave and what we have to like where we have to like give more space to the nature to act by itself. So.
I think that what you were speaking about now, control, is something that we might also speak about with Andres, because together with the theoretical part, Andres, you are also building. So for example, in the Rambla house, you have this house which is in a former Rambla, so this means a stream which only has water when it rains, in a place in Murcia, in let's say southern Spain. And the Rambla, this kind of stream, has now been slowly being covered to build and to kind of grow, to have the city grow on this flat surface. So you are kind of recovering that Rambla, that water area, but there is also a certain control of the vegetation there. And is it true?
Yeah, I think that the question of the Barcelona Pavilion with regards to ecology can be addressed in different ways. I think one is to let's say, think of the pavilion as a piece of contemporary reality, where there's a possibility to think pragmatically of it in itself, of the pavilion, and to think what is the potential that it contains. Now, for instance, thinking of the response, so we could do this, but I think that it's important to have a historical perspective, to understand that the pavilion is a conceptual device that is anchored in a specific historical tensions that are very much part of disputes about what it's the kind of ecological or the political approach to ecology that we want to have. I'm saying this because, in my opinion, it's important not to erase the violence the pavilion is part of. If we do that and we render the pavilion a contemporary piece of, let's say, enjoyable ecology in itself, but without those tensions, we would be losing the opportunity to provide a device for us to understand what are the evolutions of our societies with regards to architecture. So when it comes to the ecologies of the pavilion, for me, it's important not to segregate the history of ideas, of human ideas, of political institutions with that of nature, let's say, of wildlife, the non-human life, let's say. This is, of course, now that Bruno Latour has died, sadly, a few weeks ago, it's important to remind that his critique to modernity was that it produces segregation between notions of nature and wildlife and notions of institutions, history, and politics, and segregating nature as a realm of, let's say, enjoyable leisure and celebration of life versus political conflict, struggle, histories. Bruno Latour's proposal is to understand that they are imbricated, that when we see a plant, that plant in relationship with others, it's participating in histories and trajectories of disputes and conflicts. I think this is important because the Barcelona Pavilion is a kind of treasure for experimentation, for political discourse, to test political discourse, and it'd be sad just to reduce it to a place where let's say, beautiful gardens happen. So I want to underscore many of the things that have been said that are, for me, very important. When Alessandra, for instance, was referring to the whole tradition of the international fairs, as I think it's important to pay attention to that, the connection of trading with shaping ecosystems, with national identities and national and states as devices of artifacts of ecological control. And for me, that's not detached from the part that has to do with design. I think that any design now, any ecological design, is a design of reparation. I think there's no way around. We have to start by saying everything is not working well. You know, like it's when we cannot celebrate the state of the world now and think that there's a possibility to be optimistic. I think any design now, it's a design of reparation. And that's, for me, it's crucial, because we end up, we're in the middle of a huge environmental crisis, climatic crisis, where the biodiversity of the world is dropping at the speed that it's unprecedented. And that, and part of that, it's a number of cultures that overlap and that we have to confront. So I think that, and we have to identify how and interrogate how our architectural legacies are participating on that to produce a transition to something different. In the case, for instance, of the Rambla Climate House that we developed in Murcia in the last 3 years, it's a house that starts on a landscape that is being totally destroyed by flattening to decrease the cost or to minimize the cost of urbanization. So basically, to maximize the capacity for individual promoters to reduce to minimize the cost of urbanizing, the whole landscape was collectively reduced to a flat surface. By doing that, the ravines, the Ramblas, disappeared, and the Ramblas were crucial because were the veins where biodiversity could be accumulated in a landscape as dry as the one in Murcia. And therefore, the climatic and the biodiversity dimension of that landscape was incredibly impoverished. And the house is operating as part of a movement of many other initiatives to find ways not to reconstruct the ravines, because that's an impossible task, but to repair the ecological functioning of the landscape. And it's part of a movement that has to be done at a very bottom-up scale, because the authorities in the region of Murcia are not really willing to be part of that or to take that responsibility. So what I'm trying to say is that I think it's important to see the reflection on the water in the pavilion as not only a kind of an exemplary way of dealing with water in the pavilion, but also as an opportunity to confront a whole legacy of modernity that we have to be clear. It was based on the possibility of globalization, the possibility of extraction, the possibility of colonization, many things that that we need to see as connected to the climate environmental crisis that we are facing now.
I don't know, I hope that the microphone it's heard. I think that relating what Andres just mentioned of this, so like the pavilion considered as an intellectual device or as a laboratory of the present, I would like to bridge that with what Carlos said earlier in his presentation regarding the flag species that normally allows for an umbrella of other species for being protected. Maybe we can consider in this case also the pavilion as sort of like a flag architecture that somehow by its own iconicity could kind of allow for other architecture to be considered under this rereading. So somehow, often with Gosha, when we present something in sort of like in on a stage, we're putting this issue on a plate, which is such a golden plate. Then in the framework of what it is, what modernity is, and so on, then there is much more chances for this so these issues to be tackled locally. Somehow it resonates, so it's a chamber of...
We have chosen this native Catalonian lily as a comment to all this very complicated story of this relationship in between aquatic plants and exhibition devices, architectural spaces. As our comment to what these kind of places could be. What we have learned from our small pod is that the knowledge has to be very local. We are now more or less, we can build partnerships with local species of Warsaw because we started to know them, but we cannot replace this, the same recipes here or into Padova or into Jakobsen in New England. We need to recover as architects the topic of aquatic plants as partners to build up together those microclimates for the futures, because still we think that it's the issue of seeing these thermal relations, the thermal relations for the spaces, for us, for animals and plants, that we cannot see that separately anymore.
And Carlos, in your case, you're working with many different people, your clients. Are you seeing like an interest not only in public parks and so on, but also maybe in houses or in other cases in which people are also working with landscapes in which water and plants in water have an important role?
Yes, the interest about water plants is increasing, about water ecosystems is increasing, yes. And the item of the conservation of those threatened species, well, I think this must increase still, but we are putting this on the table. I don't know if you say this, how can I say it, but yes, many people is interested on the function of the combination of the functionality of those plants in the water, and what I'm repeating, the conservation of those plants. So this is a biodiversity question, this is a nature-based solution question, putting all together. I mean, we could apply a water-based solution with many plants that are not threatened, but we have the opportunity of mixing those questions. A point about this is the question of the natural pools, swimming pools that are not still legal here in the Spanish state, but they are legal in many other countries in the world. For us here is something that we are just discovering, something new and still not legal for collective uses. So these items, these matters will increase and will go further. I think you told that in Poland,
yes,
it was just, when you told me it was 4, so now it's 5 years ago, it was legalized. The natural swimming ponds were legal for collectivities. So we are in a moment, yeah, in a moment of historical change. Yes.
And I will also like to ask people from the audience to also think of any questions you might have. And in the meantime, while you're thinking about it, and I wanted to ask, for example, Marina, but what Anders was saying about repair, no, that they were also speaking with Ola. Do you also kind of agree with that issue that what we are kind of doing right now is always working on repair projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And this time I was reflecting on this idea of the repair and also bringing back to Barcelona and this idea of the green accesses that we have. So the super block evolved into another paradigm of a super axis, and like from my studio we've been working in the Girona super like green axe, and part of the project, or it was like from scratch during the competition, the idea it was to repair the way we have been urbanizing. So also from the point of view of public space, how we should give back to nature, like the own space to grow in decent conditions. So it was central for us to say, well, we've been using the public space as if it was like a backyard in a way. So everything that's under the ground level, it's like dumping there, all the kind of sewage installations, whatever, and that's not the quality land that you are giving to the plants. So that was our concern. And in a way, it's embedded within this framework of also repairing the way we have been urbanizing for a long, long time. And I think that we are also accepting or shifting our beauty paradigm into another one, which was something that I sensed in your presentation. So that everything cannot always be green and lush and perfect and happy, so that nature has to be appreciated also in its ups and downs and the seasoning. And that's an educational moment that we have to transition into. But I think that the culture, at least from an academic point of view, is there, but we are really hitting hard from a designer's point of view with the regulations. So I really relate to what Carlos was saying, because there are lots of ideas of things that we would like to rehearsal in public space in terms of materials, species of plants, nature-based solutions, and you are so constrained by the regulations that they don't allow you to have that or that species, or you are not allowed to have also this still water that it's in the streets. So basically we need a shift in mentalities that will allow more flexible regulations to then be able to introduce some of these innovative procedures into real life. That would be my final reflection. Yeah.
Maybe if I can add something, like, together maybe to the lexicon, we love the word reparation, of course, but Gosh and I use sometimes in our project, I mean, we like also the word reciprocity, like reciprocating in a way that we took so much from nature that it's time also to actually give back. Yeah. So somehow like this act of planting, of like densifying and adding from our side, we have this power of like making possible reciprocating what's being given to us. I think could be going together, remediate and reciprocate somehow.
So any questions maybe from the audience? Cristina, voldries afegir alguna cosa?
Totalment d'acord amb el Carles i amb la Marisa, sobretot, que a l'unir lo artificiós amb lo natural doncs ens costa molt, no? Tenir biodiversitat en una làmina molt llisa, doncs una mica doncs el lligar l'arquitectura amb lo natural, no? Que és una mica el nostre hàndicap, aquí, per mi. M'ha emocionat realment quan he vist les plantes, dic, mira, és posar-les i ja tenim biodiversitat. És el que esteu tota l'estona reivindicant, no? I és veritat que només posar una mica de planta la natura ens ve. I això, com deies tu, cal reeducar i ens hem d'anar afegint, perquè aquí encara estem, com deia ell, necessites veure el fons i no tenir bitxos, perquè els bitxos costa molt d'entendre. Què és millor, menjar-te un insecticida o un químic que veure un bitxo? Suposo que tot això, mica en mica, anirem fent, no? Guanyarem aquestes làmines i piscines naturals. Ho sento. I lose my English.
No, she was agreeing totally with this connection between what is artificial and what is natural, and how we need, it's also an issue of education, to understand how important it is to understand that both have to kind of live together in a natural way, and that we have to get used also that as interesting as it has been over here and everywhere, that when some plants are added, suddenly all this other nature, the insects, the animals and so on, start appearing and come, and we have to get used to seeing insects, living with them, all the other animals, and without kind of just being kind of not happy because that is happening. So we have to kind of not only deal with it, but understand that it is part of our nature, part of the environment where we are living. Any other question? Stella?
Thank you for your explanations. I am a little bit, so maybe this question has been already addressed, but I was wondering about this water lily recover. Would this affect the ecosystem of Montjuic or of the area? So you have been talking about how the consequences of this would affect in the living animals, no? Like the dragonflies and frogs, everything inside this pool, but would this interact with outside this architecture, and how this would affect? And the second question would be speculating this line. You talk also, or was Andres Jaque talking about this moss, this moss that has been taken over from the travertine. So there would be an hypothesis of even interacting in a higher level with more species inside this architecture?
Maybe about what was happening here, maybe Carlos can explain. I can only share our experience from Warsaw with those small ponds. Our pond is one grid. It's like 1.9 meters in diameter, circular. And even such a small body of water is attracting a lot of bees. We have, apparently we have changed the routes of the bees in neighborhood because they started to use that water. So it's not only about this micro bubble of cooler air or these different cycles during the day, because we can observe like birds, of course, which are coming. They're even playing with the plants. Sometimes they're throwing them away. We don't know why. We see some bugs. Of course, the dogs are attracted as well, but this bee pattern was for us a big surprise because we didn't know that it can be that such a small pond can make such a difference. So I guess that maybe it's not visible day by day, but I think that if any pool is starting to be not chemically treated and poisonous to the nature is attracted.
Maybe I can just add that after speaking with local biologists in Warsaw, but also maybe speaking with Carlos, we realized how much amphibians are endangered in cities due to the lack of retained water in puddles, ponds, and how in fact this possibility of having like a naturalized pool could foster life for amphibians and small reptiles, which is somehow a species, is like a sort of like an array of species which is less visible, but very important for the circle of life, in a sense, for the food chain. And somehow like this, maybe also not necessarily beautiful animals, or not necessarily like, picture perfect processes are the one that we tend to forget the most and to have out of sight and out of mind.
Carlos, do you want to add something?
No, that's true. Maybe, I don't know if we need to explain something about how these life cycles do they work, or maybe some of the animals that appeared in the pictures.
But I think that there was something
there's no need.
Also interesting and very important that has to do with the question, obviously, is that remember when we were discussing that there's the water lilies, but there's also some other plants, and by putting, for example, this endangered species, which we're not sure if it's endemic from the Ebra River or so on, the idea was that these plants that are protected, sometimes governments or regulations say that they have to be protected, but not used in parks because they are protected. But one of the main idea was, no, what we have to do is that we have to make them grow outside of nurseries and so on, so that they come back. So here the idea was a little bit to see if these plants could also grow. We have to start little by little and adapt so that they start kind of not being endangered anymore, and start being kind of something that naturally belongs to to ponds that exist or that are renaturalized.
And I think that this is the dialogue because, for example, with our pond, we had the mosquitoes. So we found like ancient recipes what to do, but without the chemistry. So the trick is easy. You put in a few pines, the water is changing pH, and the mosquitoes are like not appearing. Here it was the same. We had this glass bag for a while, and there was a biological solution how to like negotiate with these species that we don't want to oversee in the pool, how we can negotiate. So it's I think it's the same with the moss. Maybe not to have a moss in the marble. Maybe we need some lizards. Maybe we need to make it much more animalized.
But I think it's interesting this dependence. I mean, this distance relationship from the body of water itself with the different species and this array of dependencies. Like, you know, for a frog could be a few meters, for a bird can be a stop on a kilometer's journey. So that for a bug can be its entire life happening inside the pool. So I think that this, like, you know, this body of water relates to many different scales, and I think this is very beautiful.
Yeah, that's true. Let me take the idea of the dilemma about. That's my obsession. That's my obsession, and especially in this last week. And you said this before before starting. The dilemma of using protected species here, not only here, but in those opportunities, is a hot point because Catalan administration, the people that work about it, they are really close to, it's really hard for them to understand that those threatened species in nature can be grown in a garden and then planted on those places here or many other places, and then you can take it off the threatened list, maybe. But they are really immobilistic as... ¿Cómo dius, perdona? Cristina, yeah. Before starting, she said, we proposed, we would like to use Butomus umbellatus, which is a species, well, not threatened around the world, but yes, it is in Catalonia, considered threatened, so legally protected here, Butomus umbellatus. And they say, no, you cannot use this because this is protected. Well, but this is a paradox, so why not? Well, because we want to conserve the genotype. Yes, okay. We have Butomus umbellatus from Ampurdà, the very last ones. Is a very similar story as the Nymphaea from Delta Libra. But they are really afraid of anybody trying to plant those plants in other places. It's really hard to understand their immobilistic position. But so again and again, to reivindicate the possible function as NOAA arcs of those places, not only here, but many other places that could do this.
Thank you, Carla. I think we should wrap it up a little bit, but Ola, I think that we have this great opportunity to also count with you. Would you like to say something else, to add something?
No, I just really enjoyed this discussion because it brought so many levels of how this project can be understood. And I think, you know, it's, I don't know how it was for the audience to hear that, because it we pointed to different scales, we pointed to different issues, but they somehow go all together, because you know, there is a level of this project where it's about like bringing back water lilies. There's a level of thinking about naturalized ponds. There's all this political agenda that Andres Hake brought in, which I think is also very, very important. And I really, I'm looking forward to, you know, how we will develop this project next year, because it's becoming more and more heavy in this also theoretical sense as the things develop. So just I just want to thank you for all those comments, because they really enrich what this action that we have done.
Probably next year we will already be working with phreatic water here with the pond in order to change it, to add to it. So this seems like it's going in the good way, in the good path. I want to thank you all. It's really being an incredible learning process. I haven't kind of known that much about plants and all this ecological system that is being created over here until we started discussing. I wish to also thank Ola and Andres, who were online over there, the Polish Institute of Culture in Madrid, Adriana, who's behind the wall, who has been following and making this possible, together with the team of the Mies Foundation, who have been taking very good care of the plants constantly. We have a gardener, Ruth, who is kind of always taking photos and saying, well, maybe it's not working that well, but it's not that bad, and sharing with us her daily experiences. And thank you all also for being with us today over here, and the project continues. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.